Okay, and 1:30 it is, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Hewitt Tomlin. I am with Team Builder, and I want to welcome everyone to another installment of the Strength and Conditioning webinars that are put on by Team Builder and Strength Performance Network. We want to welcome everyone. This has been great. I believe this is our third webinar, and we have a special guest in today. But before we begin, we're going to talk a little bit about who's hosting this. So first, Strength Performance Network are the guys that provide the technology and infrastructure to even hold these webinars. Obviously, Strength Performance Network is the premier online social network site for the strength and conditioning industry. They offer a variety of content for coaches, including jobs, workout tips, videos, and photos. And on top of that, many more. And they've also shown me some of the things that they're building here in the future, including a new website. So a lot of exciting things going on with SP Network. Also, Team Builder is happy to help put on this webinar. Team Builder is affordable online strength and conditioning software to help coaches program workouts, save money and time, and also deliver a digital experience to athletes. I see a couple of customers here in the attendee list. I want to thank you all for coming out and supporting us, and we're happy and proud to be a part of this initiative to help educate coaches. And that brings us to the topic today, which is how to implement technologies on a shoestring budget. Now, in my opinion, this topic is a little bit overdue. I don't think anyone would disagree with the fact that technology in this field has come a long way and maybe in some ways outpaced the applications for them. So I thought that it would be important to get someone out there who is well versed in these technologies, both the high-end and the low-end technologies, and talk about the viability of them and how we apply them today in our day-to-day fields. And that person turns out to be Adam Ringler. He takes pride in being a technologist and on the cutting edge of understanding these strength and conditioning technologies. And he also can speak to them in terms of big budgets and small budgets, which is perfect because no strength and conditioning program is the same. They're all a little bit different. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Adam now. Adam, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on and giving me this opportunity to talk about the role of technology and where it's at in sport and how we can utilize and grasp some of these technologies both at a large budget capacity and what we can do from both a mid-major, from a D2 or D3, or even at a high school level. So I'll turn it back over to my screen as we go over some of the presentation slides, just so you can start to see some of the visuals as I start to talk about some of these performance technologies and the role of these. So, as far as my background, I was a graduate assistant at Michigan State University. Worked under Red Wakeham and Ken Manny, and those guys out there. Came to Wichita State University in 2010. And at that point in time, we just didn't utilize a lot of technologies. But as sport have changed, I think it's a no-brainer that technologies are certainly a critical piece of the puzzle. So we'll talk a little bit about technology, and I think for me, one of the sort of quotes I always think about as from Walter Isaacson's book, Steve Jobs' biography, is that the biggest innovations of the 21st century is at the intersection of biology and technology. And this is his. I mean, this is his sort of thought as he was going into his last few days. And I think we're at a similar position with sport. Modern athletics right now is at the convergence of both sports science, technology, and coaching. And I think it takes that trinity of understanding what the science and the application of what the latest research is coming out, how we can utilize technologies to better our coaching or to better the assessment of that sports science, and then apply it in a way that actually is meaningful for the student athletes that we serve. I think context is so important as far as the environment that you're in, because you don't have to look too far to understand that budgets are drastically different from university to university, and some have six-figure budgets for performance technologies. Some have no budget. And so what do you do when you're in that position, when you understand that sports science has such a critical role for the training of a student athlete. You understand that technology can bring that data in and help assist with your coaching. I don't think that this is the presentation to discuss how applicable technology is. I think we understand it. We understand that sports science is important. We understand that technology is important. But what do you do when you don't have those tools at your availability? So that's where we're going to go in. I'm going to, with some of the topics as we go through today, I'll take sort of a zoomed in approach, and I'll zoom in what's applicable of what we've done here at Wichita State University. I will take kind of a 10,000 foot view on some of the other topics as we go through these and just try to compare what are the Cadillacs of performance technologies out there, and what can you utilize to still get you there. Like the difference between a Cadillac and a moped, they still get you from point A to point B. One gets you there in style, the other one just gets you there. So if you don't have the budget, what can you try to apply in sort of a moped sort of fashion? And this kind of goes into what our sort of philosophy is as we go through sort of the high performance model. You'll see that at the very bottom of our structure is that technology piece, actually to the lower right. I don't think that technology alone will make up for all the other disciplines. I mean, you need to have nutritional support and psychological counseling and support, and the physical training aspects and the technical tactical aspects of it, and recovery and biomechanics and all of the various disciplines that sport requires these days. But just to zoom in on the technological piece for today is what we're going to accomplish and discuss. So I think with anything, you have to understand, especially when it comes to training your sport or your athletes or department-wide, what your key performance indicators are. And we talk about gathering data to gather it. We advise against it. We want to make sure that the data that we collect is actually able to use and to take that data in sort of a meaningful way and apply it into the direct training of a student athlete, whether it's at practice, during competition, or during our training sessions. And those KPIs will differ from team to team. They'll differ from athletes. They'll differ from maybe even a program. If we don't have American football here at Wichita State, but if we did and we were a spread offense sort of style, and that was sort of the way that our technical tactical aspects of sport required, the way that we would train our athletes would be very different. But KPIs for us have to be specific to what the biodemands of the sports are. So just the understanding of the movements, the sort of the power, the strength, the speeds, the velocities, the bioenergetics of the sport, the differences between training a basketball athlete versus a volleyball athlete or baseball or softball, and the biomechanics. So having an understanding of what those qualities are will help dictate what KPIs you need to gather. Because at the end of the day, what's important is gathering not just data points. I mean, we don't have lab coats on. We're not doing scholarly research here in the weight room. Universities do. We do not here at Wichita State, and that's not what the scope of what our sports science applied sort of fashion is here. We're using the information that we gather through tests, through evaluations, through screens, through technology, to be able to directly take that and make better, more actionable decisions. And that's what the actionable intelligence is. So to shape this in a perspective, we need to have an understanding of what the external loads of our athletes are. Number one, I mean, what the training sort of response that we're programming, that we're periodizing, that we're dosing out to them, what are those external loads? So the way that we talk about this with our athletes as we're going through this educational period with them is the external loads are what the athlete actually does. So this might be the volumes, the intensities, the pace, the tempos, the sets, the reps, the workloads, the IMAs. I mean, you name it. What is the actual external or sort of forces that are applied on the body. And then we also need to look at what the internal loads of the athlete is, the physiological response to that training. And this is just simply how an athlete responds to the training that we prescribe out. And this can be anywhere from using questionnaires or using session RPE, gathering heart rates or HRV, and using this information to understand we know what we're programming, we know what the external loads of the athlete or what they're being exposed to, how well are they adapting and how well are they tolerating those stressors. So we do this to have an idea of the fatigue, and we try to balance to make sure that we're not digging our athletes in a hole. So the overarching principle is that we need to both understand what we're programming from an external standpoint and how the athletes are adapting to those stressors, and not just getting stronger, getting faster, becoming more explosive, but are we essentially putting them in a position where they are both physiologically prepared for competition when it's Friday night or it's Saturday night or whatever other competitive schedule that we might be on, but also is the team ready for competition? And that's where that monitoring piece comes in so critically in this equation. As we go through some of these technologies, again, I'm going to try to kind of show what the Cadillac is and then partner it up and pair it, maybe juxtapose it to a different technology that might be more applicable for people that aren't, that don't have a 6 sort of digit budget. And that kind of comes to this slide as far as utilizing force plates. You don't have to look too far to understand that most universities, certainly in a research and clinical setting, have been utilizing force plates, whether it's bioengineering or sports science laboratories or elsewhere. You're starting to see force plates make their way into collegiate weight rooms, and certainly in the professional and in several cases into high school. What can you utilize if you can't go out and get a Sparta Science force plate? And this might be the kicker, that sort of the bait and switch, if you will. Some technologies, I just simply think that they can't be replicated. You can try to gather some information. You can do it in a way that's maybe not as valid as bringing athletes on and having them step on and going through a series of jumps or isometric mid-thigh pulls. But our sort of workaround for some of this, for better for worse, is utilizing contact mats. Not perfect by any means. And don't get me wrong, I'll be the first one to admit and say, look, we don't have force plates, but I understand the application of them and I understand the role of them. What can we do if we only have $200, $300, $400 in your budget to go out and get some sort of idea of are our athletes getting more powerful? Are they producing a greater rate of force development? Are they producing a greater amount of force in a faster amount of time? The way we end up doing this, and again, just to go through it, the jump mats or Just Jump or any of the other sort of contact mats out there, Smart Jump I believe as well, I don't think you got to look through that many research articles and papers to understand that, yeah, they are reliable. Now, will it measure? Is it valid? Is it a valid measurement instrument or tool to understand rate of force development? Nah, not so much. But what can you do, right? And I'll walk you guys through a little bit of what we do here at Wichita State. But this is kind of our setup. It's not sophisticated by any means, but it's real world. It's in the trenches, and it's something that a lot of people can do. We have a barbell in our first rack in our weight room. We set up the contact mat. We have our athletes go through a series of different jumps just to try to assess, again, a percentage of their body weight. So we'll go from anywhere from 50% of their body weight as external load on the bar and have them go through kind of a higher velocity or higher speed counter movement jump or squat jump with the bar. We'll work our way up from 50 up to 100, and then in some instances with our athletes that can tolerate the loads, we'll go up to 150%. of their body weight in a squat jump, and we'll get an idea, or at least a little bit of a curve for us to assess relative to the athlete's body weight what the jump heights that they can produce under those external loads. And this gives us an idea as far as what we can program out, and are athletes adapting and getting more powerful, and are we moving that curve to the right? We do this, I mean, there's several different formulas that we end up utilizing. We pull all the data from Excel, which is the primary sort of technology that we use to gather data. We pull that over to Tableau, which is another, right now, for educators and K through 12 and higher education. You can get a professional sort of edition of it, a beta, up to a year subscription. So it's another free technology that you can use to help visualize the data that you collect, which I think is in the large part some of the challenges when you're starting to try to apply this tech or apply this information and data to coaches to affect training programs or practice schedules. Is the actual, hey coach, here's the information, and being able to visualize it and put it in a sense that coaches can understand. We also use the contact mat to just get readiness information. We do this through counter movement jumps. We've done it unilaterally as well. But again, we'll input all that information in our iPad through Excel application, and then that will sync up to a Dropbox folder, which will then pull over to Tableau, which we can synchronize that immediately and start to visualize some of that data so that we can have reports for our coaching staff and we can make changes. Because again, information without action is pointless. You know, you can look at it as a post-mortem at the end of the season and say, this is what I saw, I really wish I would have acted upon it to make a meaningful change or to help dig an athlete out of a hole or maybe to affect your training program. But I think the action is the missing piece. So we'll have this. Also, this is where our athletes just load it up when they jump. They'll input their counter movement jump, and we have a rolling average across the season or across the training phase, and we'll just look as far as the actual training process for that day. Athletes foam roll, they roll out, they stretch out, we get them through a dynamic warm-up. We immediately go on the contact mat, we do a series of jumps. They're 95% or higher of their average, no intervention for the day. We'll have our athletes go through the training program at the prescribed sets, reps, and intensities, and they'll continue on with the rest of their training. If they're between 90 to 95% of their rolling average, maybe at that point in time we'll remove the CNS intensive exercises. So, you know, if it's lower body, if we have sort of Olympic lifting programmed or clean pulls, clean snatch pulls, whatever, let's remove the things that are going to negatively affect their CNS and try to give them a little bit of a training response, a little bit of a dose, but not enough where we're really digging them further into that hole. And then lastly, if they're below 90%, then maybe we need to, across all sets, remove the volume and also lower the intensities and just work on technique. So this is sort of Morris's sort of flexible periodization, and just having the ability to quickly assess your athletes and not take 30 minutes, but take 5 minutes and pull some meaningful data that can positively affect your training environment is really what I think about when I talk about actionable intelligence. As far as some of the other technologies, I mean, there's plenty of them when it comes to assessments, right? You don't have to look too far. Dynamic Athletics Research Institute, DARI, Markerless Predictive Motion Analytics, right? Like University of Missouri and the great minds over there, I think, have applied some of that, at least at one point in time did. You know, and shoot, we had our physicians also demo it here at Wichita State. I mean, they're Overland Park, Kansas City company, and that's 2.5 hours away from Wichita State. So, but again, an expensive piece of technology. What can you do if you don't have that? You know, I think I recently wrote or tweeted out a link to an article that talked about the FMS. It talked about predictive sort of screens that might potentially not be able to predict injuries, but for our money's worth, for the time investment, we still utilize FMS, and we still will end up going SFMA and go through breakouts if we see it, because we don't have the ability to biomechanically look and assess via a Microsoft Connect or through Dari what our athletes' movement patterns are. But for a 7-screen and a low investment of time, 5 to 10 minutes, you can get a very quick snapshot, nothing more. I'm not saying it's an evaluative, comprehensive tool, but you'll get a quick sort of snapshot as far as a screen. Is there some underlying asymmetries or movement dysfunctions that we need to address? And if athletes go through our training program and it's sound and periodization and through programming, FMS patterns should change. And if they don't, maybe we need to look at the breakouts and employ something like an SFMA screen. When it comes to other technologies like velocities, velocity-based training, there's a couple different things, right? And I'm going to set aside Gym Aware for an example and kind of discuss sort of running or locomotion sort of technologies. A lot of universities, I don't know if many of them employ something like OptoJump. We certainly do not. But acceleration is one of the things that is really important to us. Being so heavily dominated in court sports, both volleyball and men's and women's basketball, and the applications with baseball and softball, we want to make sure that our athletes, that the work that they're doing in the weight room, the conditioning sessions that they're doing outside of the weight room, is positively affecting them to make them faster, to make them accelerate. And ways that we try to parallel some of the information that something like OptoJump can provide for you is to utilize an application like MySprint, or to simply record your athletes when they are going through a conditioning session. So it doesn't have to be a strenuous setup. You can literally just take your iPhone or iPad. We utilize an iPhone 6 for it, which is personal phone. Set it out and be able to make sure that you have the entire start to finish, whatever sort of duration that you're trying to capture, record, and just continue to coach your athletes like you typically would. And then afterwards, to go through and load it up in something like Canova, or utilizing MySprint is another way. MySprint's a little bit harder to do just because of you actually have to kind of be behind the camera to gather all of those. But the biggest part of what I think this performance technology limits, not necessarily OptoJump or 1080 Sprint, but utilizing video, is that there's just a time delay of utilizing those performance indicators and trying to utilize that information in a meaningful way to coach your athletes to do something different. So that time delay is incredibly important, and that's where something like 1080 Sprint, right? And I know it's an expensive piece of technology, but where that comes in of limiting or reducing the time delay so that you can give that feedback to the athlete. Because the longer time that goes from the actual gathering or from the sprint or the effort to the coach saying, hey, you need to do this, X, Y, or Z a little bit better, or pick up your knees, or whatever coaching cue that you might employ, that is where things are lost. So something like 1080 Sprint is a great tool. But, again, if you don't have it in your budget and you can't sort of acquire that technology, what can you utilize? And we utilize video capturing of all of our sprints, and then being able to load that up into something like Canova, which is another open source free software similar to Dartfish that you can end up utilizing to go through and actually look from 0 to 5 meters, from 5 to 10 meters, from 10 to 15 meters. What are the distances? What are the velocities and the acceleration that our athletes are achieving during that sprint? Also, when it comes into conditioning, when you're looking at things, simple field tests. I mean, don't take for granted just simply having your athletes do field tests, whether it's yo-yo intermittent recovery. Again, that's one that we utilize with several of our teams. just to be able to assess repeated sprint ability is another sort of thing. So you don't necessarily need technology on this. It certainly aids you, it certainly helps you, but when in doubt, can you employ some sort of field test to be able to gather some information and be able to assess, are our athletes actually getting better? Yes, no. This is probably the biggest piece, I think, when it comes to performance and certainly technologies, is the point in time where wearables have infiltrated our coaching day-to-day operations. I think we would be naive and potentially ignorant if we were to take athletes out to a track and ask them to run 400 meters. And then when they come back and they ask you, coach, like, what was my time? To be like, hey, you looked fast. Let's go for another 400 meters and try again. And then they go through, and again from there, like, am I faster? What's the time did I get, coach? You looked faster, right? Like, no coach in the country would do that. Yet we bring athletes into practices. We take them through conditioning sessions, and we ask our athletes, like, hey, that looked like a tough practice, or that looked like a tough training session. So this is where the external load monitoring comes in and the wearable technologies come into play. So a couple different technologies that exist. I mean, when you're looking at something like volleyball, I know in some aspects, even with Miami Heat and some basketballs are utilizing MyVert. Several of our volleyball athletes, we do have this technology and we've utilized it. The reliability was in question a long time ago. I think they're shoring that up with firmware or updates. But again, it gives you an idea of how hard, what heights, and what sort of work are athletes doing. Obviously, you start to look at external load monitoring technologies like Catapult or Stat Sports. Just to understand distances traveled, velocity bands, IMAs, accelerations, decelerations, left, right, jumps, you name it, as far as the variables that these accelerometers and GPS units can access. But again, these comes at a cost. So what do you do if you don't have that technology? And in a large part, this is the battle that we've been in since 2010 here. And the solution that we've utilized here is utilizing session RPE. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But does it provide us some sort of internal monitoring for athletes to understand, okay, was this session hard and at what sort of level of intensity? So the challenge with session RPE is that you have a real hard time comparing athlete to athlete or team to team, but you do a pretty decent job of understanding individual athlete comparability to that individual athlete. So if Susie's going through and she's been logging averages of 5s across, a whole week, and then on Friday's practice it was a 9, right? You can safely assume, hey, you know what? That practice on Friday was harder. Now, my 5 might be your 3 and might be another athlete's 9. So that's where we lose a little bit with session RPE. But from an individual basis, you do have pretty good reliability that the data is accurate. And there's been several papers out there that talks about the validity of utilizing session RPE, looking at heart rates and distances covered. So we do this for a number of different reasons, right? And I think right now, with the popularization of Tim Gabbett's research and as far as the acute chronic workloads, we can utilize session RPE to get an idea of that, right? So what we'll look at is just having our acute or 1 week averages of session RPE from conditioning, from lifting, from practice or competitive games, and we can look and average that 1 week out and compare it against their 4-week rolling averages. And we can start to get this sort of ratio of, hey, is an athlete under training, right? Are they below or at 0.8? Is an athlete actually optimally working, and can we slowly creep that chronic workload higher and higher to affect fitness levels, and that sort of optimal range is 0.8 to 1.3. And are athletes at risk of overtraining? Are they training above 1.5 or at 1.5, where they're starting to kind of creep into that functional overreaching perspective? And this is kind of that acute chronic workload paradox, right? Like, we want our athletes to have adequate training loads, right, so that we decrease soft tissue injury risks and have good performance. We also, high training loads aren't bad if they're done correctly and programmed out and slowly over time built, because again, it's a high level of fitness, which reduces injury risk, also has good performance. However, high training loads done too quickly, kind of in that acute period where now that acute chronic workload ratio is above that 1.5, if we accelerate and we elevate those sort of distances or that sort of amount of player load too quickly, that's where the increased soft tissue risk comes, and then obviously that affects poor performance and so forth. So right now, I think that's a huge piece, and that's one of the pieces that a lot of universities are turning to, and we're no different, looking at technologies that can help quantify the amount of work that athletes are doing at practice during competitions and during training sessions. Composition, again, this is something that we utilize to just audit our program as we're going through. Are athletes actually adding lean muscle mass? Are they decreasing body fat? We are fortunate enough, we utilize kind of a DEXA, dual energy X-ray scan, so that we get an idea of what our bone mass densities of our athletes are, just again to make sure that our athletes are adapting positively to the stressors. We can start to tease out sort of risk factors if they have a low bone mass density, if they carry a little extra non-contractile sort of lean muscle mass, and we can program our training response around that. But again, if you don't have a DEXA, what can you do? And this is, again, the whole reason we like to take body compositions, and nobody across the country, I think, would refute that, is that, like, we want to assess what we need to do. Number one, we want to be able to train and have the best sort of use of their time. We want to reevaluate training after we actually do sort of an intervention. Okay, we assessed you, we trained, we reevaluate, and then we audit ourselves. Our programming and the periodization and the modalities that we program for our student athletes, does it positively affect their body composition? And that's where that sort of scan comes in. But I mean, look, we don't have to get too sophisticated, right? You have a scale. You can start to measure at least what your body mass is. You can use circumference. You can use a tape measure, skin fold measurements. I mean, you name it. There's plenty of low-tech ways of gathering body composition for athletes. Are they the most time efficient? Absolutely not. And will you lose some information? Can you get bone mass density or body composition ratios, body fat from a scale? No, right? But you can start to get some information. And that's what's so important, is that gathering of information that you can start to use. So just as an example, we don't go over to the DEXA every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or anything like that. So in the meanwhile, as we're waiting to assess and train and then eventually reassess, right, can we take body mass measurements? And can we start to say, hey, this athlete's up, this athlete's baseline from last, and we'll go a 4-week rolling average. This athlete's a little bit down. Maybe we need to change some things. Maybe it's fluid replacement. Maybe it's a little bit more additional calories at training table. And again, start watching what the trends of your student athletes are. And that's where the data visualization comes in so important. Recovery, right? And there's a lot of recovery modalities out there now. Something like BEDIT, right? You get an idea of heart rate, respiration, sleep cycles. You start to be able to quantify sleep quality and sleep duration and be able to tease out different variables from BEDIT. So total amount of time sleep, how efficient was your sleep? How much movement did you have? What was your heart rate? But again, when you're looking at athletes and you're looking at what technologies do I want to invest in, BEDIT, it might be one where you're like, yeah, that's great to have, but I don't know if it's necessary to have. And shoot, I don't have enough funds in my budget to be able to buy and equip all of my student athletes, a team of 25 or a team of 35 or a football team with all of these. So what do I do? What we do, because again, our sort of technology budget is very little. Questionnaires. You don't underestimate the power of simply asking your student athlete, whether it's face-to-face, in person, small group, individually, or remotely, i.e. questionnaires. Hey, on average, how many hours of sleep do you get? Okay, describe on a 0 to 10 scale what your sleep quality was. And you can start to begin asking those questions. Okay, like, do you look at your alarm clock, several times during the night? Okay, how long do you think passes between the time that you lay down in bed to actually falling asleep? And once you start asking those questions, it gives you the context, it gives you the information to start applying information and start to provide the solutions to your student athletes. Because again, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our athletes are recovering from the training session optimally, so they're not digging themselves into a hole and negatively affecting this training recovery balance. Omega wave, right? It's certainly looking at HRV is certainly popular at this time, starting to get an idea of what's going on from an internal load standpoint, how well our athletes are recovering to the training session. But again, maybe you can invest in Omega wave. They have a sort of a professional grade sort of tech. They have a consumer grade that athletes can buy, heart rate monitors via the phone. They roll that out. So what can you do? What we've done at Wichita State is we didn't buy, but we've asked athletes to purchase HRV for training. Simple iOS, Android application. We utilize it, again, hold your finger over the flash on your phone and the camera. 1 minute later, you get an HRV score. Is it, reliable and valid measurement? There's a lot of research that comes out by Marco, and I think you read through that, you can make your own sort of assumption and read that information. But it does give our athletes an idea as far as, hey, why am I down? What did I do last night? Or I stayed up late working on a research project. Oh, and that affects me how? Okay, I can visualize, I can see the score change. They have a team-based platform, I think, as well. I'm sure you got to invest in that. We do not. We simply ask on their type form or their Google form readiness questionnaire that we ask them to fill out in the mornings what their HRV score is. If they don't have one, we sort of, again, we try to educate, hey, if you would purchase this app at $6, that's a Starbucks latte. You skip out one session, and you can invest in your training and start to see some of this data. Plus, on the flip side, if you report your HRV to us, that only makes us better coaches for you, and we can start to look at and have some flexibility in your training program as well. So we've had some really good acceptance of our athletes downloading and buying that $6, $7 application and using that pretty consistently with their readiness questionnaires. Cryotherapy, guys. Look, these are, like most things, there's some research, professional organizations utilize it, it trickles down into colleges and university levels, those that have big budgets, and then we find it trickles down further and further. I'll show you our cryotherapy unit. It's pretty advanced, so I caution you guys that not everybody will be able to afford what we can. The good news is ours is remote, right? You can travel with it. We utilize, inflatable pool. Like you go NCAA tournament, afterwards, load it up, a couple bags of ice, you throw some toys in there, pretty fun. Is it a cryotherapy unit like this that requires a pretty initial investment? Absolutely not. It's as low-key as it comes. But again, you make the most of what you have. And if you don't have the available funds to invest in something like this, right? Can you get something out of utilizing ice tubs or cold tubs during training sessions, whether it's trash cans out at the field or at the track that you fill up with ice, like you name it. Be innovative, and it's certainly not innovative by any means to invest in a $20 inflatable pool that you can travel to NCAA tournaments with. When it comes to assessing weakness, which is another technology, as far as predictive technologies, the Nord board, which I think is excellent by all means. This is one that we just simply haven't found much of a way of solving for it, right? Like, I would love to have a Nord board here, but what we've simply tried to do as we go through looking at some of this and some of the data, and this is, I think, their force plate software from those guys over there. Is still using goniometers, using an eye test. We understand that in a lot of sports, hamstrings and posterior chain strength, especially on an eccentric standpoint, goes that it's important for us from a decelerative, from a lower kinematic sort of injury patterning, that we want to make sure that our athletes are strong. You can look at angles, you could record it. We continue to progress via load. We ask our athletes to get lower and lower. We don't have them use external loads until they can get down to the floor, at least eccentrically control it. So again, look, I'm not by any means saying that I have all the answers. Most days I feel like I have no answers. So if you've got something better, please let me know. That's a low investment, cheap technology. I would love to know it. But this is kind of what we do. We heavily program a lot of posterior chain in our training program. We utilize this as sort of a evaluative exercise, a Nordic hamstring curl, so that we can see if range of motions are improving. We hope that that would translate to greater, like a Nord board score. But again, until we have that technology, we're utilizing cheaper tech. From a genetic standpoint, right, and you don't have to look too far, universities across the country are starting to turn to companies like Athlegen, Inside Tracker. We're starting to do blood analysis of student athletes. The challenge for us as we look into these performance technologies is understanding that we need to be also internally, from a labor standpoint, available and would actually have the ability to program differently based on that information. So if an athlete does have a high motivation genetic profile, or a low motivation, or power, or anaerobic, I mean, you go through the different variables that DNA can show. Do we have the infrastructure internally to be able to make actionable decisions based on that? And that's just something right now that we don't. So, what we'll continue to do is advocate for the low-hanging fruit. Can we have outside meetings during sunrise, to help get some more vitamin D? Most of our athletes are cooped up at practice. I mean, we don't have a football team, so we're not practicing outside. I think track and field is probably the only sport. Tennis during outside season, we'll utilize and get some of this. But again, can we advocate for more vitamin D? Do we know that it has that? Most of our athletes come in anemic, and that a little bit more vitamin D would certainly help, or a little bit more iron. Again, just looking at things nutritionally. Do we know that athletes have poor sort of omega-3, omega-6 balances? Can we advocate for fish oils? Can we advocate for a healthier, sort of more balanced, less processed diet, right? So we're starting to affect some of those variables that something like Athlegen can, but assuming, which is a terrible word, I think, but assuming that most of our athletes need to work on these things, and that we don't have the infrastructure to be able to utilize that information that in a meaningful way to affect the training sort of hours that we have with our athletes, can we advocate for things like nutritionally a better lifestyle? And we do this in a number of different ways. This is a readiness questionnaire, but we'll deploy out nutritional questions as far as, hey, how many fruits and vegetables are you eating a day? What can you do differently? Do you have any fish oils? Are you taking fish oils? Obviously, clearing those through athletic medicine, but starting to get an idea of, hey, if our athletes are coming in every single day and they're not eating right and they're not fueling their performance in a right way, I don't know if I need a genetic profile of them to understand that the first thing I need to fix is their nutrition. So again, the scalability of those sort of technologies, I think, is really important. AMS platforms, look, like obviously this is from a software standpoint, there's a lot of sort of AMS or athlete management systems, Smartabase, just looking at Team Builder, obviously, right? The sponsor of this, Coach Me Plus. There's a lot of different systems that you can utilize to try to affect your day-to-day operation from a coaching standpoint. Low budget version, look, we utilize Excel, and it's nothing fancy by any means. Date, test, athlete's name, result, score, pivot tables, pivot charts, if statements. Again, you don't have to make it so sophisticated. You build it once, you build it right, and then you're able to input the data and the meaningful results. And we utilize this and we sync it up. I mean, if we're gathering testable results from anything, conditioning, I mean, we'll have it loaded up on our iPad that we have, our in-weight room iPad. You can load it up on your phone, sync it to Dropbox, and you're good. You can gather that information, you gather those reports and that data. We do this with readiness reports, same idea. We deploy them out through Typeform or Google Forms. We'll pull all that information in. We'll load it up either through Tableau or through Microsoft Excel. We'll produce readiness reports for our coaching staffs. Again, some reports we'll keep internally. If they're having a poor night's sleep, don't think we need to go and run and immediately tell coaching staffs that, hey, Susie stayed up late. But when we start to see a trend, then we can report those to the coaching staff to make changes. Is it perfect? No. But is it some intelligence and some information that you can start to utilize to have a conversation with the student athlete? Absolutely. Excel is still a powerful tool. I mean, when used correctly, I think you can still get a lot of information from it. So again, just reporting like, look, you're improving on your times. You've gone from a 62 to a 61. You've passed on this metric that we're utilizing, or a field test. But being able to build a report and being able to show progress over the course of time is important. Both the visualization of that to a coaching staff to say, hey, yeah, she is getting better, or to be able to prove that to a student athlete and say, look at how much better you've decreased over the course of these 6 weeks by this amount. When we do that, I think the reporting of those KPIs is critical because it builds buy-in. When a student athlete can see the changes that they're making, right? They're not just feeling the tough sessions each week, but they're actually going through it and they're like, man, I can visually see how much better I'm getting. It builds internal buy-in from the student athlete and builds buy-in from the coaching staff as well. Again, I mentioned that we utilize Dropbox. So again, we'll just share all of our reports. We have a shared folder. We'll invite all of our coaching staff to that shared folder. We've streamlined it with the addition of Slack, which is a communication tool that we've utilized here, so that all of our reports, anytime that we save a new PDF via macro or an Excel, that it goes to that shared folder and it reports or updates it in the report sort of channel in our Slack tool, which all of our coaching staff is invited to utilize as well. And that brings us ultimately to the point of any information, and that's to better enhance your communication with your student athletes and with your coaching staff. So again, we utilize Slack. It's just a team communication hub where all of our information is at, right? So you can have private rooms, you can have closed rooms, you can invite temporary guests, you can permanent team members, but this has been a way for us to get outside the email inbox and actually share the information with the right people, whether it's ATCs, whether it's physios, certainly our internal staff from an S&C standpoint, our sport coaches that we serve on the technical side. And we do this because it's made our lives easier. And this is just some statistics that we pulled from ours. I mean, we got 3,600 messages that didn't go through email that goes through our Slack. So again, getting outside the email inbox, 180 different files that we host, a lot of integrations as far as bots, AI, different ways of connecting different softwares together. Again, just to try to illustrate our year from a competitive sort of collegiate annual cycle. I mean, this is all-time sort of statistics, messages from people, messages from integrations. And what you'll see here is that our integrations or bots actually deliver more meaningful data than sometimes we do. So when you start to improve your streamline your information, and you can have AI bots report or sync or whatever, rather than you having to physically send an email to a coach or hand deliver a report, if a bot can do it for you, it's removing you from the desk, it's removing you from the actual sending of that information so that you can do your job better, i.e. coach. And we do that as well, right? Like, just as far as the people involved in our program actually reading or writing these things. And what we'll see is that most of our people read everything that we write. So that's kind of important because, you know, like, how many times do you hear about, you know, injury reports going out and people are like, ah, man, I didn't have time to read that in my inbox. I was too busy. What we've found is that just utilizing Slack actually has cut that down, and we can have better communication and better workflow with everybody that's centered around the student athlete. And maybe lastly, with everything, as far as some of the tech that we talked about, and I think this is often missed so much when we start talking about technology and its role and that sort of convergence or trinity of technology and sports science and coaching, is that technology is never going to replace good quality coaching, and that the intelligence, the IQ portion of what the technology can bring, it has to support the emotional sort of intelligence as well. And that's a relationship. And utilizing technology to improve a coach-athlete relationship is what's ultimately most important. So, you know, that's where looking at distances or using Catapult to be able to explain to an athlete why we're making these changes, right, is important. Not just to understand that these guys aren't, you know, subjects. They're not our experiment subjects. These are our athletes, and we got to take care of them. We got to train them right. So building that relationship with a student athlete won't ever come via technology. We'll utilize reports, we'll utilize questionnaires, but that's just to get some information so that we can bring athletes in and start talking and teaching and educating. Because at the end of the day, that's who we are. That's what we are. I mean, you know, some people across campus are sports scientists, and I get that. But if you're coaching and you're a coach, I think you're an educator. And I think you have to build that relationship with the student athlete. And while technology is great, it's never going to be a substitute for high quality relationships with student athletes. Look, this presentation, and this is my last thing here, and we'll turn it over to you guys. Look, I tried to cover some breadth. I tried to zoom in on some things that we do here at Wichita State. But again, a lot of it we're touching on. I mean, performance technologies. There's so many different things right now that's going on in sport that it's hard to get a grasp on everything. But I wanted to kind of quickly browse through all the different technologies. I still think that there's a hierarchy of needs of technology, and you know, first and foremost for us at Wichita State, it's to understand what the external loads of our student athletes are. That's where something like Catapult or Stat Sports comes in. And then if you have more in your budget, you know, you can invest in AMS platforms, you can invest in velocity-based training modalities, GymAwares, you can invest in different sort of recovery modalities and tech. You can build it up there. But that's specific to KPIs, that's specific to what the bio demands, bioenergetics, the biomechanics of the sports, the teams that you work with, your context of your the organization that you work for. There's just so much to talk about when we talk about this. And look, this is my contact information. Email me, tweet at me. I'm pretty active on Twitter. Pick up a phone, call me. I think you can find everything online now. Email, telephone number, social security, whatever. And please, look, if you got better ways, I want to know about it, because I want to adopt them and make our program better. So I'll turn it over to you.
Good. Hey, Adam, thank you so much. And we're not letting you off the hook that easy. We've got a couple of questions right now. And yeah, we're going to cover. So first question is, in this data age, what will strength and conditioning programs do to ensure that coaches actually utilize this data? Are coaches going or are programs analysts and data scientists?
Oh man, good question. I think you need to understand the coaches that you serve, right? And that is ultimately a relationship that you're building as well. And I think when you look at organizations, you'll see that coaches will adopt technology, they'll adopt sports science, or they won't. And I think ultimately it's on us as educators to help educate and bring the value, or to educate the value of what these technologies will bring to the coaching staffs that we work with. Some will get it, some won't ever get it, and I think you have to be okay with that. Is it perfect? No. But ultimately, as a support staff, we are here to support the vision and the program of our head coaches. So, control what you can control for, and that is whether, employing low-tech, tools, or high-tech. If you got to drive it through other people's budgets to do it, and you can, awesome. But, if a coach isn't utilizing that technology or that data, and you're educating them and providing the context of what this means, and this is the stimulus, and this is how athletes are responding, and there's a better way of doing it, and they choose not to, I don't know. I think that's a failure of education on our part. That's a failure of them not wanting to become educated and look at a different way of doing sport or training or adapting. But ultimately, control what you can control for. I do think that we live in a time, and I think having a pulse on the collegiate standpoint, that the environment that you're starting to see, more lab sports scientists being hired in sports science departments. You're starting to see data analytics and in collegiate sports now. I do think that's a role. I think it will fit into that sort of performance model, where it might be that you have recovery specialists, and you have physios, and you have team doctors, and ATCs, and S&C coaches, and data, analytics and analysis. So, ultimately, just control what you can control. You're not in some aspects, you'll teach old dogs new tricks, but not every single one of them. And I think we got to be okay with that, and just continue to champion the right way, control what you can control, continue to educate, and go from there.
Great, and we have quite a few questions, and we're not going to get to them all, so let me go ahead and say we want the conversation to continue to Twitter. So if you could, hop on Twitter after this, follow Adam, SP Network Team Builder, and go ahead and ask your questions there, because it'd be really good if we can get a conversation going after this session's over. But before we leave, I'm going to try to pump a few more in there just to make the most of our time. This next question, Adam, is by Richard. Richard says, for those of us using mopeds instead of Cadillacs, it's not easy to contain all of our data, tracking it appropriately and creating visualizations without a software platform. What advice do you give for data management using Excel, specifically for templates and things of that nature?
Yeah. Okay.
There you go. Now you're on.
Look, that's a great question. The thing I would do, data can become unmanageable if you gather so much of it. I think so many people gather so much data because they, in the beginning, as they're starting to kind of get involved in this and the data analytics aspects of sport and the performance side of it, that they gather so much without formulating the question. So I think ultimately you need to know what question that you want to solve, and then really start to identify what those KPIs are, those key performance indicators, and then keep it very concise. I would, 1 to 2 variables that you're trying to measure. Start small, aim small, miss small. So maybe that's, am I scalable? Can I be flexible enough to measure one variable every other week with one team? And start to see if logistically, if you're scalable and your labor force is scalable to go from one variable to 2 variables, from one team to 2 teams, to 2 teams to 5 or 6 teams. Because that's the challenge, I think, is that, especially if you're the guy or gal that's championing this and this is what you want, you got to make sure that it doesn't become bottlenecked at you, that your labor and your flexibility and time demands, as well as coaching, can facilitate all that data. So start small, miss small, make small mistakes. Don't try to measure every single thing from day one. Simple reports, I create, and again, you can kind of go back through the webinar. I create a separate worksheet for each test that I measure, for each team that we have. And it seems to work out pretty good. It does take some time. There are some times where, we'll coach and we'll have 5 teams come through the weight room, and I might spend, an equal amount of time doing data, and that's part of it. Especially when you have a coaching staff that wants the information, that wants that data, because then they start making and affecting their own practice schedules. So if you have a very data conscientious coach or program, that's going to be what the job demands are.
Very cool. This has been great, and like I said, there are more questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to carry the conversation over to Twitter, and everyone, please take these questions that didn't get answered and throw them on there, and we'll certainly get Adam tweeting at you, as long as it doesn't take him away from his real job, which is not educating strength coaches but training athletes. And last slide here. Becoming a better strength coach. Again, SP Network does a great job of putting this on. They're the technical partner, and we couldn't do this without Strength Performance Network. So if you don't already have a profile, it's free. Go to strengthperformance.com. The return is immense. All this that we talk about, all the educational content, is usually on Strength Performance Network for free, amongst a lot of other resources for strength coaches. And additionally, make sure to stop by teambuilder.com. If AMS or software and visualizations is something that's important to you, and you want to try to do this on a budget, a little to no cost, and certainly try out TeamBuilder. There's a 14-day trial. And this is something we can certainly help you out with if you're interested in doing a demo of that. So with that being said, we are going to conclude the webinar. Thank you everyone so much for showing up. We had great attendance today. This webinar will get recorded, and we will send this out to everyone after the fact. I look forward to hopping on Twitter and seeing what everyone has to ask and what Adam has to say back, and hopefully we can get a continuation of this educational session on there. And please look out for the next webinar, which will be announced shortly as well. So thanks again, everyone. We hope to see you around soon. And especially thank you to Adam for stopping by here and giving us this presentation. It was really fantastic, and we appreciate his time.